So I'm going to talk a bit about measuring yourself and the sizing for choosing your pattern. So first of all, get a tape measure that's got metric on it. It's probably the best because you get a more accurate sizing. And then probably stand in front of a mirror is a good idea, because when you do your bust, you don't want the tape measure to be dropping down at the back. So if you put the tape measure around your bust and then look in the mirror and make sure that it is completely horizontal, and you want a firm measurement, so there's not really any extra there, and then read it off on the tape measure. Make sure you've got the one at the start. It's easy to do it upside down, and mine is actually 100, so I'm just going to write that down. I have a piece of paper and pencil handy. Now your waist is your smallest part, so it's where your hands stop when you put your hands on your waist. So even if you're, no matter what size you are, we all have a waist. You just got to find it, a bit like me. I need to find it. So again, a firm measurement, so no extra. I'll explain a bit about that later. And I'm actually 83 waist. And then hips. Our hips are actually where our hip bones are here, but actually often we're wider a little bit lower down. So start on your hips, put it on your hip bone and get a nice tight measurement. And again, make sure it's not dropping down, that it's completely horizontal. And then just shimmy it down you. And if you need to release it out a little bit to get over your thighs, then make sure you do until you get a measurement that is your widest part, but it will go right over. And mine's 104. The only other measurement I'd say that would be useful would be a finish length. So if you're doing a dress, it will say back neck to base of ham, and obviously trying to do your back neck yourself is really hard. So just find the hollow of your neck and put the tape measure there and just hold it, and then look down to see how far you think you would want your dress to be. And mine will be about, probably about 102. So I just put length at 102. Because often they will say how long it is on the back of the envelope, and you just want to check that it's long enough. And when you're learning, the only other measurement I think that is important is this measurement here. Now the reason for that is that sizing's a lot different than it used to be in patterns. We're about 2 sizes larger than the pattern sizing is, you know, compared to the shops. And as patterns go up in size, they become wider and wider. So often this will be too big for you. If you're a size 14 in the shops, you'll be an 18 in patterns. So that the width across here is much bigger than your body frame really. And obviously to measure across your back neck is quite hard on yourself, like this. So again, you can measure across the front. It's not a whole lot different. You just want to get a rough idea from shoulder point to shoulder point, so where a t-shirt seam would come, what your width across here is. And I'm about 43. So just put across back 43. And that'll really help you when you come to actually cut out your pattern, that measurement, which I'll explain a bit more about later. So just those measurements are all you need, I think. And now we go to the pattern envelope to talk about the sizing that we would choose. So I've written my measurements down here. Bust 100, waist 83, hips 104. And I'm going to look at the measurements on here at the top of the envelope. And bust 100, wow, if I have to read the metric down below because this is imperial. So if I look at poitrine, which is French for bust, well, a 16 is 97 and an 18 is 102. So I'm kind of between the two. So what I tend to do is I write down that I'm a 16 on the bust plus 3 centimetres, or an 18 minus 2 centimetres. and I write it down like that. So I'm a 16 on the bust plus 3, or an 18 minus 2. And then for the waist, I'm 83. Well, actually, an 18 is 81 and a 20 is 87. So on the waist, I'm an 18 plus 2, or a 20 minus 4. And then on the hips, I'm going to do the same. The hips, I'm 104. So I'm closer to a 16, because a 16 is 102, but an 18 is 107. So I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to write hips. I'm a 16 plus 2 centimetres, or an 18 minus 3. So by doing that, I can see which one I'm nearest to. Well, on the bust, I'm nearest to an 18. On the waist, I'm nearest to an 18. And on the hips, I'm nearest to a 16, but very close to an 18. So I think on balance, so, you know, on the bust, I would definitely go for the 18. There, I go for the 18. They're 16 or 18. So I think on balance, I am a size 18 closest on this pattern. And hopefully you don't think I look like a size 18. I am normally a 14 in the shop, so that sort of shows that they are 2 sizes smaller than the shops are now. Now, you will notice that patterns only go up to a 22, or sometimes a 24. Yeah, the butterick here goes up to a 24. So you do have to be careful, because that isn't that big. You know, if you're a size 20 in the shops, you're going to be at least a 24 in patterns. The multi-size patterns are really good because they will show you how to grade up, and that's not too difficult. So you will be able to make it bigger. Or there are some plus size patterns around, even in the commercial patterns, that you can purchase, but they tend to not be as current. That's the problem. I think the best one for current plus size are Burda, but Burda are a little bit more difficult to follow when you're a beginner. But they do really lovely modern plus size designs, especially in their monthly magazine. And then when I'm actually cutting out, I have this beside me so that I know that if I am cutting out a 16, I've got to add a little bit on the bust if I did decide that's the way I was going to go. So my advice is to, obviously for a dress I'd be an 18. For a skirt, I mean, I am closer to a 16 on the hips. I may be able to get away with a size 16 pattern, because included in patterns is something we call ease. Now I'm going to talk a bit about ease because that's quite important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ease. Included in every pattern that you buy is something called wearing ease as standard, and that will be about 8 to 10 centimetres around your body, so that you'll be able to move in your garment, because obviously your body measurements are just your body measurements, there's no extra. So wearing ease is a standard thing that's included in every pattern that is from woven fabrics. If it's a stretch pattern for stretch fabrics, it won't have any wearing ease because they use the stretch of the material to do the work. But in a woven pattern like the one I've been talking about, like a dress or a coat or jacket, there will be at least wearing ease, which is about 12 to 15 centimetres around our body all the way through. Now, that's if your garment is fitted. If your garment is not fitted, if it's, say, semi-fitted or loose-fitting, then the extra that they add is called designer ease. So wearing ease is what they start with, and then they add in designer ease according to the design of the garment. So if it's semi-fitted, like this one, there will be more ease obviously here than here, because this is the design of this is very flared at the bottom. So this may be fairly fitted, so they may just have standard ease or wearing ease up here, and then down here there will be designer ease added in addition to the wearing or standard ease that is added extra to your measurements. So the actual garment will measure a lot more than your measurements do. So that's something to be aware of. So when you're measuring something on your pattern, you might think, well, that's just enormous. But actually it isn't. You need that extra. You've got to be able to move about. But it does help you when you're in between sizes. So sometimes you might not need to use all that ease. Your fabric might have a bit of give in it. So if you are between a 16 and an 18, like me, I vary according, then that sometimes I can look at the measurements of the actual garment as opposed to my measurements and think, actually, I could probably cut a 16 for this. My advice is that when you're learning, obviously cut it big enough. So probably go for the bigger size, because it's much easier to make things smaller than to not have enough fabric and you'd be using up the seam allowances and etc. But it's quite a handy thing. And obviously if there's a lot of designer ease added because of the design of the garment, then you're going to have a lot more to play with. And inside the pattern, in the instructions and on the pattern, depending on which patterns you buy, there are even more pieces of information about the measurements of the garment when it's finished. But I'll talk a bit more about that when we go into looking at the actual pattern instructions and the pattern, the printed pattern. Now I'm just going to talk about some of the other patterns that you might find. There's a lot of what we call indie patterns around now, and a lot of patterns that you may get from America, of more sort of current designers, maybe from the Sewing Bee, places like that. Just be aware that their sizing may be completely different, and also sometimes the amount of seam allowance that they give you is different as well, or sometimes they don't even add seam allowances onto the pattern. In the commercial patterns that I'm talking about, Vogue, Butterick, McCall, Style Simplicity, New Look, Burda, they all include a 1.5 seam allowance around all your pattern pieces. And that's really important because we use that to, if we need to enlarge it at all. So if you're buying a different pattern that's not any of those known names, do check if there are seam allowances included, what the seam allowances are, because you might want to add a bit more so that you have got more to play with if it's just a centimetre. But also what the sizings are, because I've noticed a lot that the more modern patterns, they're changing the sizing to come in line with more like the shop sizing, but there doesn't seem to be any uniformity to it. So some of them are really close, some of them are in between. Some of the American patterns are really, different bust, waist and hips in comparison to the standard sort of differences. So you really do need to measure yourself and compare it to the actual pattern sizing of that particular pattern.